Now, at this point, a guide can only do so much, since every player will come in with a different assumption and understanding different concepts on an intuitive level. It's impossible to just make a video that will help all players with whatever their diverse roadblocks are. The mental roadblocks are the most difficult to overcome. It's really easy to just say, oh, you didn't know that this move is, it's punishable, so, yeah, go, punish it, and you'll win. Sometimes people struggle because of a lack of some basic knowledge that they could just be given, but some people struggle out of blindness to certain habits that they have, and, you know, for certain things there's a few exercises I can recommend. But yeah, players who just struggle mentally. This was me for a long time. Players who have difficulty focusing, get easily distracted, easily annoyed, make frequent mistakes despite practicing, exhibit wildly fluctuating levels of skill under different stress levels and circumstances. They have challenges that are harder to overcome than just telling them something of how the game works or what tends to function. Like, did you see that you missed that anti-air, bro? If you anti-air the opponent, they'll die sooner instead of them killing you. Did you know that, bro? Like, fuck off. So first, let me break down the kind of skills or forces that you can leverage towards your own advantage or your overall level of strength. So the first category I'm going to make up is tactile strengths. These are objective skills based on knowledge and practice and sheer physical ability. The first tactile skill is game knowledge. Knowledge will always be your best friend. You know what's punishable, you know how a certain situation works, how the mechanics work, know what's strong and weak, what to exploit about the opponent, their playstyle, their character, know how a risk-reward breakdown works out for a given scenario, know what tools and techniques you have. You can never have enough game knowledge. You can always learn more about matchups, button interactions, anything like that, so on. The next tactile skill is situational awareness. Otherwise, I would refer to this as experience. Your knowledge, what's in your brain, okay, what you know consciously will only take you so far without the intuitive muscle memory to execute upon it. You can know a situation logically and academically, but you need to play in that situation in a real match enough times before your mind and body are fitting together and responding to it correctly. This is where having a training partner, especially one who can replicate various characters and playstyles and recreate situations in real matches, is immensely helpful. The next skill is execution. Your ability to perform techniques without costly errors. Simple techniques that you can pull off 95% of the time are much better than advanced techniques that you can pull off 60% of the time. Some things are execution-based, even if you wouldn't naturally think of them as execution, like walking forwards but then blocking fireballs, or blocking overheads, or whatever, or fuzzies. The hardest part of blocking overheads, depending on what controller you're using or whatever, isn't necessarily the reaction speed, it's getting the input to a clean back input smoothly and instantly. The next skill, a form of game knowledge, a subcategory of game knowledge if you will, risk-reward management. This goes slightly beyond just pure game knowledge, because your play isn't completely based on your knowledge. The game is fast and you don't have time to carefully consider all your options. So you will do things that you know that you shouldn't have done after the fact. That's unavoidable. Risk-reward management is your ability to manage yourself and your own instincts in the situations, but in balance with still playing the game and taking actions. Your ability to align your own actions more closely with what you know to be good and correct, and a combination of situational awareness, game knowledge, and a mental aspect of self-control. The next tactile skill is optimization, doing stronger stuff, better stuff, stronger combos, stronger, more consistent punishes, stronger setups and offensive plays, better resource management, less waste. In this game, there are many times when you have a hit that can get the kill, but it's hard to tell in the speed and heat of the moment that you've already finished the game and that you have a combo route that can kill. The hardest part of optimization is managing resources that you don't always get clean chances to use, like drive gauge, super meter, and recognizing in a split second that your current hit you can convert from will give you the right route, or even the kill route, if you spend enough resources. So that's, a lot of practice, a lot of work in the lab, memorizing routes, memorizing recognizing those variables that, like, you know how back in the day in school, for, like, little kids, they don't really teach small children how to multiply smaller numbers, like 1 through 15 or something or whatever. They don't do the actual work of multiplication. They just have them memorize a bunch of equations, like, 7 times 3 is 21, and they just have them memorize those rote things instead of mentally processing it. That's how you need to do optimization in this game. You have to memorize just a shitload of different circumstances and combinations of variables and just already know the answer, because you won't have the time in a real match to process the answer fully. You just have to know the answer, and that takes a lot of rote memorization of microscopically different circumstances. The next tactile skill, versatility. Having multiple play styles and having the game knowledge and experience to deal with a variety of circumstances that may occur. Many times, if an opponent is playing in their normal style and they're losing, they'll often switch up how they approach you. Maybe they'll become more desperate, or maybe they'll just adjust the style. You'll need to be equally capable against their other styles of play that they might rely on. So your versatility against characters, play styles, tools, personality shifts, etc. Finally, the final important tactile skill is variety. This is an important strength that people often overlook and don't think about. Variety is the strength of having a boatload of different tactics, techniques, gimmicks, and game plans and potential plays that you can pull out during a match. The more variety you have in your tools and the ideas that you present, the harder it will be to anticipate or form a game plan against you. Especially strong players, they will go for solid, consistent stuff a lot of the time, but they have a large variety of solid, consistent routes, and in their minds, they also have an unending treasure chest filled with countless little tricks, little traps, little gimmicks, little techniques and plays that they could go for at any moment. Sometimes all it takes to reach that next level of play is just add 2 or 3 new fucking tools or tricks to your kit and just diversify your options a little bit more. Your variety is the enemy of the opponent's versatility. If they can beat 10 of your tools and you still have 20 more tools that you can throw at them to see if they're equally prepared for every little trick that you have, that's strength. That is a legitimate, incredibly important strength. Next are the mental skills. The first one is focus. This is a vague word by which I basically mean your ability to lock the fuck in, okay? I have no real advice on how to improve focus. I'm not a psychiatrist, but if you're good at paying attention to the match at hand and you can access the mental state in which you play your best at, that is a good look, and you can try a variety of mental techniques or nutritional supplements or whatever to achieve that. Actually, forget what I just said. That's not the most important skill. The first and most important mental skill in any fighting game is your pursuit of growth. There are a lot of fighting game players, even ones who want to win and stuff, who just stagnate forever because they are not doing meaningful things to improve themselves. You can play and do the things that you know that you're used to and just never try to reach that next stage, or never put in that much work or whatever, or never learn from anything from losses, never pursue a course that could make you a little better than you were before. And the dregs of, like, online play in any fighting game will be filled with the dried up corpses of players who are not really any different right now than they were 2 years ago. And that's not a knock against people who know what they want and they're not interested in improving, or, you know, it's just they find it difficult to be motivated to do certain aspects of training. Whatever. All motivation and effort put forward into improvement is the actual overwhelming most important skill that will make your future self infinitely stronger than others that are around you right now. Next mental skill is your peak performance. This refers to your highest level of mental ability in combination with your highest level of execution. If you really focus on an individual moment, what is your fastest reaction speed? What is the maximum number of things you can look at in a single moment? In a fighting game, you can luckily narrow down your focus based on the situation to very short bursts of attention when something is happening. So, if you tap into your peak performance, what tools are you capable of employing? What is your fastest whiff punish that you can do if you're putting all your focus into one reaction and scenario? Things like that. This is like, this is a lot of what Street Fighter V was about, because when you did a button that you were trying to single hit confirm, you know that there are only like two outcomes. Either it's blocked or it's on hit or whatever, and so you can put all your focus into that, and nothing else really matters. So you can create a single burst of focus on one specific thing and achieve reaction speeds and mental abilities that are beyond the vast majority of the time when you're just playing the regular match. The next mental skill is active memory. This is very important. Active memory. Can you remember how a round played out, like, a couple seconds later? Can you remember the last situation? With how straining the focus is in these types of games, you have to proactively put things into your memory. You can't just do things and then expect that you'll remember what just happened. Otherwise, you will lose them and you won't really remember the exact details that are important. Proactive memory. Alright, a related skill to that is data absorption and data processing. Again, this is a proactive skill. You will not just remember things that the opponent did last time unless you make yourself remember it. Like, lots of new players, a Manon jumps in, they don't anti-air, and then the Manon command grabs them after the block jump in, like, 5 times in a row, and every single time they respond to the situation, and then after they get hit by the command grab, they're like, shit, why didn't I remember that? That happened like 9 times. So this skill refers to your ability to put your focus into paying attention to a specific piece of information during key moments and then forming a plan in your mind based on that information. For example, when you do a meaty, when you do a block string, notice. Proactively focus on and notice. Is the opponent crouch blocking? Are they stand blocking? When they get hit, are they getting normal hit or counter hit? Are they fishing for parry attempts? How shortly after blocking are they moving or hitting a button? What was their behavior immediately after? You have to make sure to actively pay attention to those things and actively put them into your memory so that you can get a lot of data about your opponent's habits and thus notice patterns that will make them much, much easier to kill. The next skill is mental proactivity. A lot of weaker or earlier mid-level players suffer from this sort of bystander syndrome that I'm talking about. Well, they'll just fall for the same thing over and over again, and then even though they know it's coming, they'll do the same thing on autopilot and get hit by the same thing and think, why the fuck did I do that? I knew that was going to happen. You have to mentally, proactively prepare your body to do the things that it needs to do. If you know the opponent command grabs you in the same 2 situations in a row, and you obviously think, okay, I got hit by that again, obviously he'll do it next time, but when the next time actually happens, it'll happen sooner than you think, and you'll still autopilot or suffer a moment of indecision if your brain is not currently thinking about that. So you forget to take action. You have to mentally, proactively tell yourself what you will do the next time a scenario occurs to make sure that your body actually does it and acts immediately. Your brain will not just conjure up a memory the instant a situation happens in time for you to make the correct response. You have to plan ahead for what you will do under the next circumstance where you know what the outcome will be. The next mental skill is mental risk-reward management. This is not in-game risk-reward management. This is about you managing your own focus during a match. Making sure that you are switching your focus appropriately to the things that will yield the highest reward and the least risk, and based on the opponent's habits. If you put your focus into things that will yield a low reward, that are difficult to focus on, and that the opponent is not doing that much, and you therefore, if you put your focus into that, you lose focus on other things that are more important, that you have, that are easier to deal with if you focus on them, that will give you more reward. That is poor mental risk-reward management. I'm sure I mentioned this in the previous videos, but There are a lot of things that you can afford to ignore, and so that you prioritize putting your focus into the things that matter and that you have more power and control over. So mental risk reward management is your ability to self-check yourself and recognize, I'm focusing on things that aren't helping me right now. I need to change my focuses. The next skill is malleability. This doesn't refer to the constant stream of tiny adjustments that you will make throughout a match to adjust your opponent's tendencies. This is about the stubbornness of your brain. See, especially like beginner to mid-level players, many of them have an issue where a problem comes up, and they more or less like understand what they should be doing, but playing the game takes up so much mental energy that they don't have the room left to actually make those conscious adjustments to their game plan. They know, while watching themselves back, that they knew what they should have been doing differently, but they didn't have the mental energy to force themselves off of autopilot. You can either try to expand your degree of focus, which is very hard to do, or put a heavier priority mentally into making those adaptations, which requires some mental gymnastics if you're not used to doing that. But it's important to, play the match in such a way that you lighten your mental load so that you can give yourself a moment to let your brain think through what changes you should make. There are multiple factors that affect how quickly you can recognize a problem and then make a deliberate change to your game plan. But overall, this skill, your ability to consciously take the knowledge that you know and make the adjustments to your game plan, is what I call your malleability. There are a lot of players, sadly, that have like a serious grind set. Like they have a pursuit of growth. They really want to improve, but they have weak malleability. And having weak malleability really fucks with your ability to grow by playing online matches. Because if you are not malleable, if you are slow to make adaptations in a match, then a 1st to 2 is not enough time for you to like slowly like get more relaxed and get into a state in which you can afford to do that. So if you have low malleability, you can make adjustments and you can improve so long as you do long sets with people, and there you'll start to see more significant growth. But yeah, if you have weak malleability and you tend to go on autopilots in 1st to 2s and have trouble getting off of autopilot, online is like pretty rough until you improve at that skill. The next mental skill is calmness. One of my players asked me a couple months ago how to deal with like getting tilted in a match, and I gave him a variety of options. I said, 1, you can play more aggressively. You can express your own emotions through gameplay. You just have to make sure to do it in a smart and complex way, not a simple and obvious way. 2, and that goes to, again, variety. Like, you can play aggressively, but that just doesn't mean just like EXDP on wake up every time or just forward jump over. There are lots of ways to play aggressively if you have the variety, if you know a huge variety of aggressive plays that you can make that will allow you to shift your style. 2, you can occupy your mind with something while you play and play off of your core basics and your peripheral attention. You can, say, count backwards from 100 in your mind. It is an effective technique, don't underestimate this. 3, you can attempt to relax yourself and trust in the mathematical objectivity of your plan. Of your game plan, I mean. And 4, take a break, do something else for a while, or at least transition over to watching your replays and doing lab work for a bit instead. The objective realities of lab work are helpful, or like a helpful current to your negative feelings, because as you lab, you will see the situations for exactly, literally what they are, and you won't have like the cynicism of believing things to be worse than they literally physically are. The next mental skill is ignorance. The human brain naturally wants to think about whatever thing just happened, but you have an important job as the player to make your brain shut the fuck up and ignore the things that will pull your attention away from where it should be. There are a lot of gimmicks in this game, in mid-level play and whatever, that people get hit by, and it shakes up their mental state, because they get distracted trying to focus on some gimmick or some weird thing the opponent's doing, and worrying about this small amount of damage taken by this, like, bad risk-reward action, like Kimberly doing YOLO run slides and whatever. They lose focus in the parts of the match that they have much more control over. A lot of people will run into 3 fireballs in a row and then get distracted by that, even though 3 fireballs in this game, not a lot of damage, way less damage than a single jump-in will do, but being stubbornly ignorant of those fireballs is a hard skill to master. You have to keep ignoring it and keep your eyes on anti-airing. One of the most important mental skills is profiling. You could call this psychological assessment, or reads, or vibes, but what really happens is, eventually you will just play so many types of players that you start to notice personality habits. There's a meta to how types of players of a certain character or a certain skill level play, and your conscious or subconscious profiling of what box they fit into will give you some instinctive insights into what they're about to do. This is like the horoscope version of situational awareness. This is being into a situation with a player that exhibits certain tropes, tendencies, personality traits, and meta-ideals that you basically get a feeling for what's going to happen from time to time because your instincts have learned through rigid experience what a player of this disposition will do. And lastly, the final mental skill is honest self-reflection. It is important to keep up your motivation by being able to see your objective strengths, your objective accomplishments, and your growth. But it's also important to objectively know what you are and are not currently capable of, and plan your play around what your own abilities actually are. Lots of players try to play as though they are better than they are. They try to play a game plan or use tools that rely on a certain level of ability in some way that they haven't reached yet. And worse than that, there are a lot of people that teach new players skills that their skill level is not ready for. If you're playing an uppercut character and you're not using their anti-air, crouch, heavy punch, or whatever button they have, but you can't reliably DP anti-air, your style is not being honest to your ability. Use the skill that you can do, okay? So, tactile skills, mental skills. The final category for me is abstract skills, or like abstract forces. Some of these are not necessarily skills. The point of listing all these things out is that most of these skills are more or less understood by most players, but players will still reach like this precipice. There comes a moment, usually around like master rank somewhat, well, there's multiple points, but usually like around master rank 1650, 1700 MR, it's not enough to simply have a solid game plan that adheres to the conventional wisdom that makes sense and just make very few mistakes. You have to find a way to take your game plan beyond conventional wisdom. You have to find a way to defeat other players who understand all the same rationales and who also make very few mistakes. So these are skills or forces that can be used to defeat players who make no mistakes, or even beat players who in many ways may be objectively better than you in other skill sets. So, and these are skills that make the game more complicated, skills and forces that make the game more complicated, but that you can leverage to your advantage, and you often have to. Abstract skill number 1, initiative. A player can make very few mistakes, but they are still human and they're limited to human ability. Doing the right thing in each situation is still not enough if the situations were never in your favor to begin with. Initiative is a relatively simple concept. Strike first and create situations that favor you. If you wait for a player that you're afraid of to act first, they will usually win. Force number 2, gambling. You can take your current power level even further beyond its limits through gambling, through creating higher risk-reward circumstances and harder bets. You may destroy yourself sometimes, but you have the potential to strike and hit well above your current weight. Gambling can either be an overall strategy to fight stronger or even give yourself an early advantage against evenly matched opponents. It can be something that you can turn on and off. Either you may gamble early on to see if you can get an early lead through good luck, or you can gamble later on if you're losing and you need a way to make up the difference. Obviously, the game will always involve gambling, but it's something that you can either begrudge or leverage to your own success. There is a massive difference in player stability between a player who loses a round or a game because they knowingly gambled and tested the waters to put ideas into their opponent's head with bolder actions, versus a player who loses while feeling completely at the mercy of guessing wrong and whatever the whims of fate may be. Leverage gambling and leverage gambling in ways that are pointed towards the goal. Play to win, and then if you lose, that's just one of the statistical possibilities of your intentional gamblings. That is within your... That is something that you did. So it's hard to really explain, but it's a mindset where you have to take gambling, the percent likelihoods of gambling, as like outcomes that you are measuring for, not just annoying things that you feel you don't have control over. Skill number 3, counterculture. Playing off meta. Playing in a style that people are not used to. Constructing a strategy for your whole game plan, or even smaller parts of your game plan that are logically sound, but are not what most people do. You can take advantage of the fact that the opponent is not used to it and doesn't have the meta experience to predict your actions confidently and understand your logic of how your approach to the meta may simply just... And it's also possible that, you know, whatever your approach is actually could just be better than the current meta. You don't even have to do things that are necessarily even good, so long as the opponent cannot tell whether or not it is good while they're playing. If they face even a moment of indecision in not instantly knowing the risk-reward balance of a certain situation and what available options they may or may not have, they can make bad decisions even in the face of mathematically shitty strategies. Skill number 4, specialization. You can completely rework your approach to a matchup from the ground up rather than playing your normal game plan and then altering it in ways to like match the character of the player. If you do an intense amount of lab work and practice to construct a single style of play that is designed to just do one fucking thing, like just to fight a particular character or even fight one particular player. This is not something that you see that much in this game. But like in the olden days, there would be like a player would pick a new character that's not their main and develop an entire rationale and style just to beat one other player or one other character in tournaments and stuff. Again, they don't do that much nowadays, but that is what I would call specialization. And the final abstract skill, Inland Empire. Inland Empire doesn't mean quite the same thing as intuition. It's not necessarily about reading or predicting, and it's kind of similar to counterculture. Inland Empire, by that I mean doing things that feel right to you, letting your weird ideas play out, doing weird shit. Not as a core part of an overall flowchart that you do, but weird actions that are done on impulse that feel right. Inland Empire is basically tapping into your vibes and flow of consciousness to do unexpected things that are not predictable because they are not part of an overall flowchart. They're not part of your overall game plan. This is an important skill. Don't underestimate. This is a very important skill to cultivate. Tapping into your impulses, your free-flowing impulses, will help you diversify your approach and become much less predictable. And level up your offense beyond, again, the mathematical limits of the hard risk-reward scenarios that you can create, and it will loosen the stress on your brain. It's a style that is very useful because it makes you less predictable, and it also loosens you up in a way that makes you less rigid and less... It can even out the creases in your plan. So those are how I would break down some of the skills that you can develop as a player. You don't need to reach a certain proficiency in any one skill in order to become more competitive and fight against stronger opponents. This is where there's a lot of bad advice from otherwise talented mid to high or high level players, because if a high level player doesn't realize that the strategies they go for and the things that they do only make sense for their particular skill set, and then they tell someone who doesn't have those same skills to emulate what they do, it just won't work. There are players who just never personally struggled with having their minds in the wrong stuff during matches, so they don't know what advice to give a player other than, you didn't react to that, why didn't you react to that? Because they don't get it. You know, they don't get what it's like to not have certain mental skills or not be good at certain things or find certain things intuitive. So yeah, there are a lot of legacy skills that people are broadly aware of, and then there are more subtle or abstract skills that people don't actively think about, especially here in the West, where our conversations about fighting games are pretty much preschool level. Basically, a lot of people will tell you that there are like 5 or 6 skills that you must become great at, and then they won't know of any advice to offer you after that point. I am here to tell you that there are a lot of different skills and a lot of different ways that you can become stronger and a lot of different skills that make you stronger, and you do not need to rely on one particular thing that you suck at least temporarily, and can't seem to find a way to get better at. And also, some of these skills affect other skills. It's harder to get better at certain reactions if your execution is not up to par, or if your mental management is not up to par. You may think you're bad at some things that in reality you're actually bad at something else that people are just not very coherent at recognizing. Something mental that's blocking you. Particularly, there are always means to become stronger that do not rely on your human ability fundamentally improving in some way. If you're bad at reacting to things or executing things, if you're bad at anti-airs, you're bad at counter DIs, or checking drive rushes, or perfect parrying things on reaction, or whiff punishing medium buttons or heavies, there are always things that you can do to become stronger that do not hinge on you just getting more talented than you currently are, that don't rely on you, that your brain just working smoother and faster and better. Knowledge, strategy, and decision-making go a long way, and are oftentimes less fleeting than sheer ability. You'll never win every single situation, and the goal is not to get perfects on the opponent and always guess right and always do everything flawlessly and have no weak points, but to win the long-term chess match, to take the opponent's king regardless of your sacrifices. A close win, this is important, a close win that you get is not the same thing as a sloppy win. A close win it may be sloppy, but it doesn't mean that you played in a sloppy way. Bit of a hard pivot. Let me talk about stress while fighting in a little bit. Being stressful to fight against can be a huge benefit, but the opposite is also true. If you play in such a seemingly tight and insurmountable way that your opponent does not feel tension, because they don't even feel like they're coming close to winning in some situations, their play will reflect a lack of optimism or stress, and they will quietly die without putting up much of a fight. If you've ever had experience fighting against actual, top-level world-class players, this is what they feel like to fight. You don't feel stressed while playing them, you just kind of silently drown against their superior skill. You wake up and the match is over. Your blood never gets cooking, you never turn it on, you know? This has more to do with the huge disparity in skill, but just know that if you're fighting an opponent, they may feel stronger than they actually are. If you're fighting a guy who seems really put together and is systematically dismantling you and your errors in your game plan, stop to think if you're feeling stressed or not. If you just feel like you're slowly drowning, you do need to change it up. You need to increase the stress for both you and your opponent. Again, they're not perfect, okay? They are human and they bleed. Cracks can show in their seemingly perfect play, and a bit more stress will give you the blood flow that you need to be dangerous. My next tip for this part is optimistic interpretation. When something isn't going your way, it's very easy in fighting games to feel it more than you objectively think it through. You can even feel like you're losing even when you are literally objectively winning. There are 3 modes to interpret anything in a competitive setting. There is hard, cold, objective reality. There is, the risk-reward of this scenario is X, Y, and Z, and those are the facts. The second mode is psychological influence. Players are genuinely influenced by psychology in a way that makes a pure guess, a pure rock, paper, scissors, not exactly the same as the objective math of the situation might imply. And the third mode is histrionic fantasy, where you interpret some magical supernatural force that is just making things turn out the way they are. Or like a player is right, a player is somehow beyond time and beyond what is reasonably within human skill, just through objective math or even psychological influence, because it feels like some guardian angel is protecting them and making them right. It is very easy in fighting games to start interpreting things through pseudoscience. When you are in a match and you guess wrong on Oki like 5 times in a row, there's 2 places that a person's mind will go to. Fuck, I'm doing something wrong that I'm not aware of that is making my success rate very low or very close to 0, or I am magically wrong every decision I make. There's nothing I can do. I can't do anything. The first may be true to an extent. After a match, you should check the replays and see how factual your interpretation of those events really was in the moment. If you actually have a bad habit that is making you predictable in some way. But the second, I lost several interactions, I've been wrong several times, there is some sort of supernatural force stopping me from being right, is an extremely common impulse that people feel in the moment. After people even heard that there are, like, cheaters playing on SF6 online, right? Lots of people heard that. Do you know how many times I have heard low or mid-level players say, this guy must be cheating, this guy has to be cheating, when it obviously was not the case? You know how, like the social media psychology thing, where, like, someone will there'll be 90% positive comments that won't stick in your mind as much as, like, 5 negative comments will? Most people's brains just naturally pick up and get stuck on negative feelings. So you can have a totally normal, average success rate for things, but because the negative interactions make more of a psychological impression to you, you feel like you're struggling more than you are. And when your brain focuses on all the negatives, every interaction that you lost, especially if they happen multiple times in a row, or at least pretty close to each other, or once your brain has a little parasite of an idea that there's something wrong with what's going on, then yeah, people will feel like there is a problem. The fact is, this is a gambly game. Players below, like, I don't know, 1700 MR usually tend to have problems with their play that make them more predictable than they should objectively be, but sometimes you do just lose 5 interactions in a row, and that's kind of normal in this game. Optimistic interpretation is the key. Like I said, there are 3 modes of interpreting something. 1, objectivity. Just look at the objective numbers and data. You have a certain % chance of being right. 2, the game is a multiplicative interplay between the objective math and the abstract psychological influence that are affecting you consciously or subconsciously. And 3, the game is somehow magical, or someone must be cheating. My opponent is just magically right all the time. Reality is closer to number 2, but when negative things start happening, it is helpful to interpret them through mode 1. When something goes wrong for you, just tell yourself, I lost because there is an objective degree of failure in the mathematics, and it doesn't mean my rate of success overall should be in jeopardy. It is just the reality of probability, and not an issue. When something positive happens, interpret it in the opposite way. When something really positive happens for you, you should interpret it through mode 3. Fuck yeah, I am literally magic, anything I do will work. There aren't a lot of things in fighting games that will just make you feel confident and good about yourself. There are not a lot of things that will make you focus on the positives. You have to choose to interpret the things that you can in a way that will increase your positive vibes and your confidence. Otherwise, because of the nature of psychology, the negatives will gradually outweigh your positive vibes, and that will fuck with your motivation and your gameplay. There is sometimes such a thing as overconfidence, but it doesn't happen very often. 95% of the time, players are weaker because they are not confident enough that the things that they do will work, and they hesitate, and they clam up. I have never coached a player whose problem was that they were just too fucking confident. If you're fighting in a long set with, like, a buddy, There's no stakes, so you can just test shit out, and it's whatever, it's all practice. But if you're in a tournament setting, you should not fuck with your game plan on the fly. Do not start, losing a few interactions, and then getting needlessly anxious, feeling like you need to reinvent something, reinvent your approach. Leave the thinking part of things to training mode, and maybe between matches if you're allowed time between matches. A half-baked plan will always be worse than your tried and true. In terms of strategic merit, your ability to execute, and the general fluidity and your own confidence in your own play. Lose with what you know is supposed to work and make small adaptations with that. Lose with what you're trying to refine and what you're trying to get better at, or you will only hurt your chances of winning and hurt your chances of improving as a player. I talked about proactive thinking earlier, and there are 3 types of planning for how you play against your opponent. There's play that you can apply against most or all players that is just broadly effective. Usually play that puts the onus on your opponent to deal with the problems you are giving to them. Or play that tends to meet the basic human psychology for which most players will tend to behave in similar ways to each other in similar situations. And then you just adjust that through observation. Next is planning via observation. You actively think about what your opponent is doing in each situation, and you play in such a way that you can see what the opponent does. You do a median block, then you walk back and you see what they do. Do they do they just sit there and block? Do they do a delay tech? Do they do a delay jab? Walk back? Whatever, delay action, etc. Form a plan from it. Lastly, there's a weaker version of that, which is reactive play. There's soft and hard reactive play, I would say, in which you're not actively choosing to memorize the things that your opponent does, but you just happen to notice patterns as they keep occurring. Soft reactive play is short-term impulses. Often this, I would say, is a bad thing, because it often means that you're being baited into psychological traps where you are made to notice simple patterns and then baited into an action that they can punish. Hard reactive play is when you get hit by something for the 5th time and then go, wait a minute, that's happened a lot, I should plan for that. Reactively noticing things is less ideal than noticing things proactively, because you went out of your way to pay attention and memorize it, but it is better than not noticing things at all. Ideally, you should develop your play that broadly works against all type of players, and your ability to be proactive in paying attention to the opponent's frequencies. And don't take any advice too seriously, including my own. Fighting games are all about the brain just doing the right thing in the right way, and this game is largely about just happening to land the hits that give you big damage and whatever. There's no formula for getting you to that place, so you have to fish around for other explanations or ideas that will make sense to you and help things click. But more than that, a lot of fighting game advice out there is really, really fucking bad advice. There's tons of Dunning-Kruger, mid-level players who know a couple of things, but they think that they know everything, and then they give lots of shitty advice to newer players. There are even extremely skilled players who no longer remember what it was like to be new, and to not have all their skills, and to not understand anything about the game, and they cannot put themselves back into that state of mind. If they ever were weak players to begin with, there's a lot of top-level players who just started and became god tier within a couple months, because they were just naturally skilled and they just intuitively picked up in it super quickly. Both good and bad players are liable to give you advice that will hurt you by recommending you do things that are outside your current skill level, or that you won't be able to make use of in real matches and will just eat away at your mental stack. Watching the Sajam Slam, when multiple nigh beginner level players were taught for several, hours how to perfect parry Luke's fucking sandblasters in neutral, as if they were ever going to be even remotely close to being ready to use that in a beneficial way in a real match by the time that the event happened. For myself, I still remember what it was like to be bad at all of the mental aspects of fighting games. ADHD, autism, depression, low motivation, anxiety, easily distracted, poor short-term memory. I always have really bad short-term memory. But I've always been extremely strong at core math and logic, so I have other natural gifts. So I have instances where I struggle to relate to players who just don't understand the mechanical concepts or reach the same logical conclusions that make logical sense as quickly as I do, because I which leads to me not being as good of a teacher towards some types of people as I want to be, because, again, I was just always been naturally good at math, and so I am not as good at relating to people who just, the math part of it and just the logical outcomes don't click for them as quickly. There's a lot of messages and ideas that are just floating around the internet for eternity that players just pick up and regurgitate to other players, regardless of whether or not it was ever good advice in the first place. Endlessly repeating buzzwords and brain-dead phrases from 20 years ago. And worse than that, the FGC on the internet is, generally quite toxic all around. Twitch chats will backseat you and be toxic to you if you're a streamer. If you're a woman, you can expect maybe 3 to 4 death threats per week. Things like that. So not only will people offer you bad advice, but they will be quite aggressive about their bad advice and call you an idiot if you don't adhere to their bad advice. So try to keep your head down. Try to interact with people, a bit better than just the randos online. I can confidently say that 95% of anything you see someone say unprompted about this game and what is good or smart to do is probably wrong or at least misguided. And worse than being wrong, it is often just toxic defeatists spew that will only bring you down or to see or pay attention to it. Only pay attention if it's something tactile that you can immediately objectively test. Like, if they say, this combo does more damage than that other one, you can objectively test that. Except for me, of course. I mean, come on, would I lie to you? Would I lie to you? Anyways, that is my advice. That's about it. See ya.